Alright, hello and welcome back to another episode of the discussion series where I talk about Zoodiac and all of its different variants. So the last two videos we talked about pure Zoodiac and also Dogmatica Zoodiac, and in this video we are going to be discussing Eldlich Zoo. Now this is one of my favorite variants personally. I don't think it is the best by any stretch of the imagination, but I like how it interacts with other decks and how it also interacts with itself. So let's go ahead and jump into the deck list, and then we'll discuss the deck more as a whole near the end. So we have 3 Nibiru, 2 Golden Lord, 1 copy of Fleur de Lis, 3 Zoodiac Thoroughblade, 2 copies of Zoodiac Whiptail, 1 copy of Ram, and then 1 copy of Rat Pierre. For more hand traps, we have 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, we have 3 Magician Souls. For the spells and traps, we have 3 Pot of Avarice, 3 Cursed Elderlin, 1 copy of Zoodiac Barrage, 3 copies of Fire Formation Tidkey. We have 3 Infinite Impermanents to round out the hand trap lineup. Then we have 3 Eldlich of Scarlet Sanguine, 3 Conquistador of the Golden Land, and 3 aquaro of the Golden Land. For the extra deck, we have 1 copy of Zeus, 1 copy of Drill Driver, 1 copy of Constellar Pallades, 2 Tiger Mortar, 2 Chakanun, 1 copy of Dryden, 2 copies of Borbo, 1 Access Code Talker, 1 Nightmare Unicorn, 1 Barricade Board Blocker, 1 IP Masquerena, and 1 Link Karibo. Now, the side is something that we've kind of touched on in the past, and it's really up to you and your locals on what you side, but this is generally a really strong lineup for this deck. I wouldn't stray too far away from it just because a lot of these things have meta relevance, are impactful, do a lot against certain matchups, so I'll touch on that very briefly here at the end, but it really doesn't need a lot of explanation. So we play 3 Nibiru strictly because it's a very impactful hand trap. It does a lot, puts a 3k beater on your board, clears your opponent's board, and if you time it right, it could end your opponent's turn. We play 2 copies of Golden Lord. Just, if you play 3, it's a little bricky. You don't necessarily always want to open it. If you do, it's really only applicable going second. There are plays you can do going first where you send it and a spell or trap card from your hand to the graveyard to send like Cursed Elderlin to the grave, and then you get Elderlin's trigger effect in grave to dump I think it's a Golden Land, yeah, one of the Golden Land spells or traps, but really you never want to be doing that. It's just kind of burning through your resources quickly and can just end up not being great in the long run. We play 1 copy of Fleur de Lis for the Magician Souls. So Magician Souls, to summon itself from your hand, you have to send 1 level 6 or higher spellcaster monster from your deck to the graveyard. And while Souls is on the field, you can send 2 spell or trap cards from your hand or face up to the field, or face up on the field to the graveyard to draw the same amount of cards that you had sent using that effect. So that is the base, I guess you could call it the Souls package there. The reason why you play Fleur de Lis instead of Apprentice Illusion Magician, which is what people used to play when they were playing Eldlich variants, is because you can summon this card if either player controls an extra deck monster, and this is actually a card that can trade with Dragoons. So when it attacks, it gets a stat boost of 500 attack and defense, putting it on par with Dragoons. So they have to waste their negate, negating the effect of Fleur de Lis, so they don't lose their Dragoon. So it only, really baits the negate there. It is just a big body you can summon on the field, if you hard draw this card. But overall, it just does more than what like an Apprentice Illusion Magician would. Now, the Zoodiac lineup might seem a little weird, but you're having 2 control decks, put their strengths together to form like just a very cohesive control deck as is. So you don't need, 3 Zoodiac cards in your hand at one time. I mean, you play 3 Tidkey and a Barrage. Those are basically 4 copies of Rhoda. Now that we're playing 7 Zoos, that's technically like 11 Zoos. So it's statistically probable that you'll open up a copy of one of these cards, either a Zoo or a way to get you to a Zoo. So 3 Thoroughblade, just because Thoroughblade, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best one, but it's just good to stick on the field. I would definitely say Whiptail, aside from Rat Pierre, is probably the best one just because of its banish effect. But, it's easily accessible also, just like any of the other zoos are. So, you can play 3, 2, 1, and 1. It's all personal preference. If you were to add more copies of Zoo monsters, I would recommend probably just adding them and not taking anything out. Maybe adding 2 more. You could add like another copy of Whiptail and another copy of Ram. Otherwise, if you really wanted to stick to 40 cards, you could take out the Avarice and just hope that you can close out the game quicker. But the strengths of these 2 decks, kind of meeting in the middle and joining as one, is the fact that they're both very good decks in the grind game. That is what Eldlich has always kind of endeavored to do, and that's what Zoo endeavors to do. So when you mix the 2 decks, I mean, you're looking at really dragging your opponent out, kind of pulling out the resources, tiring them out, making the game harder as you amass advantage in the long run while they lose advantage. So really, you don't want to see too much of one or too much of the other. And one of the weaknesses of this deck, which is why I don't think it is the best variant or, even really close to it, is the fact that if you're going second, all of your purple cards, aside from their permanents, do nothing. So Sanguine doesn't do anything, Conquistador and Aquaro don't do anything going second, so you really have to wait before you can utilize those cards in your hand, and I think that is the biggest drawback of this deck. So, going back to the monster lineup here, we play 3 Ash. It's just, not technically high impact, but it does hit a lot of power cards, so you kind of have to play 3. Magician Souls, we talked on this. If anybody knows anything about an Eldlich deck whatsoever, you know that they pretty much always played Magician Souls. You can send your dead 10 keys, you can send your Elderlin, you can send, any dead card, or any dead spell or trap card from your hand or field to the graveyard. If you have multiple copies of any of these cards, you can just ditch them off of Souls. And for those of you that maybe aren't too familiar with the Eldlich cards, Cursed Elderlin, I'll go ahead and I'll just skip over the Avarice because you all know what Avarice does, and then we'll just focus on the Golden Land and the Sanguine card for now. Cursed Elderlin lets you pay 800 life points to search a Golden Land spell or trap, so it searches your Conquistador and your Aquaros. And also, when it is sent to the graveyard, when it's sent from the field to the graveyard, it sends a Golden Land or one of your Eldlich cards, or Eldlich monsters, from your deck to the graveyard. So, if you don't already have immediate access to your Golden Lord, you could always send it to the graveyard off of Cursed Eldlin, and this does trigger off of your Souls. So if you Souls send this and another card you draw to, then this triggers, basically netting you another card, because if you send these to the graveyard, on the end phase you can banish them and set a Elixir, which would be your Scarlet Sanguine. Barrage, this also has the same unique interaction, popping your Eldland or your 10 keys or any of these monsters, technically spells and traps, but if they're monsters on the field after you've activated them, you could also pop them to get them into the graveyard without having to worry about, maybe linking them off or getting them off the field somehow. So there's a nice interaction. And any interaction in this deck that revolves around popping cards can also be achieved using the Dryden's effect. So, if you're in a situation where you really just want to kind of like slow roll it and not commit a ton of resources to the field, you can make Dryden underneath 4 summons, use his, or her technically, effect to detach a material and pop your Cursed Eldlin to get cards in grave and just kind of, have that rolling. So, 10 key at 3, strictly because it's a Rhoda. Everybody knows, you just want to play as many copies of your searches as you can. Impermanence, for the same reason as any of the last videos. It's, just a good solid negate. You can set it, turn off a column. And then Sanguine. Now, here, the rest of these cards will just be, like engine cards for the Eldlich section of this deck. Eldlich or the Scarlet Sanguine lets you special summon 1 zombie monster from your deck or graveyard, but if you control no Eldlich monsters, you can only special summon Eldlich monsters with that effect. For the rest of the turn after this card resolves, you can't special summon monsters except zombie type monsters. So you always want to activate this card at the end of your combo. Basically, it's the exact same thing as using any of the Dogmatica cards because they lock you out of the extra deck. Just think of it like that when you're playing this version. You can use this on your opponent's turn also, since you most likely won't be doing any summoning outside of maybe like the Fleur de Lis to chum block an attack, but you're really never going to be doing that. So during your opponent's turn, you can activate it, summon your zombie, and then really there's no restrictions after that. Also, you can banish this card from your graveyard to set 1 Golden Land spell or trap directly from your deck, but you can only use 1 effect of Scarlet Sanguine per turn, and only once that turn. So you can't summon your Golden Lord from the deck or graveyard and then also use its effect to banish to set a Golden Lane spell or trap in the exact same turn. So normally you do want to just activate Sanguine on your opponent's turn to special summon a monster, and then on your turn, you know, at any point, you want to just use that effect to set either of these cards. So moving on, we have Conquistador of the Golden Land. Now this card is basically the Trident of the Eldlich deck, because while you control a Golden Lord, when you activate this card, you can destroy one face-up card on the field. Now this card does not target, so they have to have a response to the card's activation for you to not get the pop. And now the same goes for Aquaro. It's a banish instead of a pop, but you also have to control Eldlich of the Golden Lord to, you know, get that banish effect. Now when either of these cards are in the graveyard, it has the same kind of effect, secondary effect that Scarlet Sanguine has. You can banish this card from your graveyard, set one Elixir spell and trap card from your deck, and then you can only use one Conquistador of the Golden Land effect per turn and only once that turn. Same with Aquaro. Now the interesting thing about these cards is they are technically trap monsters. They summon themselves from the spell and trap zone as monsters with no effect. They are vanilla cards, it's just the trap effect is what gives them the additional pop and the banish. So they are not considered an effect monster, they are considered a vanilla normal monster. Now they are both light level 5s. Conquistador of the Golden Land has 500 attack and 1800 defense, so it is a good monster to summon in defense, so it doesn't get ran over, and you know, depending on the matchup, that 1800 might be able to buy you another turn. Aquaro of the Golden Land, his stats are also light, level 5, but his attack is 1800 attack and his defense is 1500. So he's good for pushing for damage. He's good if you're playing against Zoo. You know, you could oftentimes use him to crash into one of your opponent's Zoo monsters. Now, the biggest weakness here is that they have a whiptail attached to it. Aquaro will get banished after the damage step, so you do lose the recurability of the trap cards if that does happen, which is why I think this build in the current meta might not be the strongest. If your opponent really knows how to utilize their whiptails, you're going to have a very hard time. Whiptail outs these trap monsters, and it also outs your Golden Lord, because you're not always going to be summoning Golden Lord in attack position using its effect. You know, it'll usually be in defense when it comes back, and if I didn't talk about it earlier, which I don't think I did, one of the additional effects of Eldlich of the Golden Lord is the fact that you can not only send this card and one spell or trap card from your hand to the graveyard to target one card your opponent controls, it's actually just one card in the field, and send it to the graveyard. It can bring itself back by sending a spell or trap card on the field to the graveyard. Technically, its effect doesn't read, you know, like bring this card back. You can just summon any zombie monster from your hand, and if you do until the end of your opponent's next turn, it gains 1000 attack and defense and can't be destroyed by card effects. So it does become like a really big monster with 3500 attack and 3800 defense. Very hard to get over, very big on the field. You know, staring down a 3500 Golden Lord that can't be destroyed by card effects is very, very intimidating. But it does get outed easily by cards like Zoodiac Whiptail, or a Zoo extra deck monster with the Whiptail. So it does have some weaknesses, it does have some strengths. You know, it's really just kind of like how much do you want to control, how, you know, do you feel with the deck, like your level of competence with the Eldlich cards. So it does mix well, but you know, there are big drawbacks, but also big pluses. So the extra deck doesn't need to be touched on a ton. Everybody knows Zeus right now. Zeus is just such a good card. You can recycle it off of Adverse if you need to. It's just a very big power play. Same reason why we play Drill Driver in the other versions. It's just a 2500 Piercer that is a res when it gets destroyed. And then we have Pleiades. Now, if anybody played Eldlich when the cards were originally released, you'll probably remember using this card. These are light level 5, so you can overlay 2 of them for Pleiades, and then Pleiades is another interruption. It's a detach 1, bounce a card on the field, and that is a quick effect, so it's during other player's turn. It's just, you know, kind of nice to have there as an option if you don't want to link your cards off and just want to put another body on board. Then we have 2 Tiger Mortar, 2 Chalkonine, very standard for any, like, mash of Zoo in another deck. Obviously 1 Dryden, and then 2 Borbo, same as the reasoning for the Dogmatica deck. Usually that kind of engine stays the same. Now, we're going to get into something a little different from any other Zoo deck that we've seen, and that's like a larger link package. We play the Access Code, the Unicorn, the Boar, the IP, and the Link Karibo. So the Link Karibo is for your Magician Souls. if you can Magician Souls and then set up like a, you know, your normal Zoo combo with Dryden and stuff like that, it gives your Dryden battle protection because it contributes itself to make your opponent's attack 0. So if they're trying to bait out the Dryden activation by summoning a monster then go into the battle phase, you basically just force your opponent to go into main phase too, because unless it's like a Pankratops or something, they're not going to have an out to it. Basically Link Reboot just functions as a way to keep your Dryden on board through the phases. Then we have IP Masquerena. It's a generic 2 non-Link monster, Link 2 monster. There's really not much more to say about it. It lets you get your Golden Land cards off the field, and if you have these cards in the field already, you can use IP's effect to link with any of these into your Unicorn, and that gives you like another interruption on your opponent's turn. So you'll have these as active interruptions, and with IP that turns into like a Unicorn, which is really good. And then Access Code Talker, just because if you're making a Unicorn play, you're most likely going to have access to put another monster in field, then that gives Access Code Talker his ability to target Nightmare Unicorn in the graveyard, boost itself by 3,000, and then you have your pops. Unfortunately, everything in here is a dark, so you're really only going to be getting 1 pop per turn, but having a 5,300 monster on the board is very, very strong. It's intimidating against a lot of other decks, and it's just kind of there as like a way to remove resources from your opponent, as, you know, the Eldlich cards do and as the Zoo cards do. So it just contributes more to what the deck is already doing. Like I said, I don't really feel the need to touch on the side very much. You know, Lancia is just good against Dino and any deck that banishes. These cards are big, you can put them on the field basically for free. Twin Twister is good to discard, especially in this deck. I would probably play this over Cyclone just because you can send cards like Sanguine and any of your Golden Lands to the graveyard and get their effects in the end phase to banish and just give yourself back resources. So you're not really, you know, losing any resources in that exchange. Also, you know, if you're playing Cyclone and you guys are in game 2 or 3 and you're running down the clock, Cyclone does put you down 1,000 life, Twin Twister does not, and that 1,000 life could really matter if you're, you know, reaching the end of time. Feather Duster, because it's just the generic back row wipe. Let's see, Ice Dragon's Prison. This card is great in the mirror match. I'm not sure if I touched on this last time, but this is a really nice interaction in the mirror match against Zoo, where you can just take their Zoo monster and choose to not banish any Beast Warrior in the field and just keep the Zoo monster, and use that Zoo monster that you stole from your opponent's graveyard to just overlay into your own Zoo monsters in the extra deck. So it's really strong, kind of gives you a nice foothold if you haven't seen one of your Zoo monsters, and it's just an easy way to kind of start stacking up and comboing. And then Red Reboot for the exact same reason as I mentioned last time. If you reboot your opponent and then are able to attack with a Xyz monster, in main phase 2 you can just overlay into Zeus. They can no longer trigger any of their trap cards, and then you can just Zeus the board. So it's a really good way to kind of punish control heavy decks, especially if they just decide for some reason to set another card from their deck. You know, if you're using Red Reboot from hand. There's just a lot of really big like game-winning options that you can access off of just Red Rebooting like a control player. So I think that about wraps it up. This is definitely kind of like the third tier of Zoo decks. It's, you know, not the best, but it's not the worst. It can definitely compete. It's not something I would personally play myself. It's just, I think it's a little too much. It loses to interruptions a little more, like Ash and Valor and Imperm and stuff like that. You kind of get hit a little bit harder than if you were playing Pure or the Dogmatica version. But it's still strong. It's still worth testing out if you're interested in it. If you have the Golden Land cards, especially with the reprint of Golden Lord in the latest Gold series, it might be worth testing. So just take a look at it. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are in the comments. If you could please like this video, share it if you can, tune in for more videos. I think my next video will probably be about Tri-Brigade Zoo, which I'm kind of looking forward to this, and I'm kind of not. It's probably the version I have the least amount of experience with, but I'm also extremely opinionated about it being not the best. But it will definitely be interesting because it plays different than any of the other Zoo variations. So once again, thank you guys for watching, and I cannot wait to see you guys in the next video. Thank you.